Okay, hello everybody, and I hope that you all managed well with module one, and remembering that what we were talking about was the whole concept of what life itself is, and then looking at organisms and considering how they interact. We looked at it very briefly, how they interact with one another, and then we began to get the idea of how organisms interact with their environment. And when we talked about life itself, we came to realize that life consists of an organized set of reactions and everything in which living things take molecules and they build those molecules into other biological molecules, biomass, as it is called, and that in order to do so, they need to manage energy. And so this is going to be the focus of our topic today. And that is to look more carefully at how organisms acquire matter and how they manage energy in order to build molecules and perform all of the functions of life. So this really is the heart of the study of ecology. And ecology is basically the study of interactions between organisms, between the living parts of an ecosystem, the biotic factors, we call it, and the non-living or abiotic factors. And those things interact with one another the whole time. But those interactions are what determine where living things live and also determines their abundance. They have to interact with one another and they have to interact with their environment. And depending on the structure of the environment, that will determine where certain things can live. Interactions with one another determine things like how the food resources are used, for example. You've got a very big population of organisms that all depend on the same food resource. They're going to compete with one another for that. So their population will become constrained. Now, what we're really talking about here is the management, as we said in module one, is the management of molecules and the management of energy, both in the organism itself, between organisms, and between organisms and their environment. So at the basis of all these interactions lies a fundamental requirement, and that is that we have a continual source of energy. For reasons which I will explain really carefully in the next couple of slides, we continually lose energy. We continually lose energy because transformations of matter and energy are inefficient. And you don't believe me? Put your hand on your arm and feel the warmth that is coming from your own body. That warmth is a byproduct of all the metabolic processes that are going on in your body. And that warmth is biologically useless. It's eventually going to be radiated out to space. We lose energy continuously. And we depend absolutely upon autotrophs, especially upon the plants and organisms which photosynthesize, which we call primary producers. And they're primary producers because they are the first organisms that actually construct biological molecules, which everybody else can then use. This process of photosynthesis is very complex. We're not going to deal with it in detail, but I'll just tell you that the process of photosynthesis takes carbon dioxide and it takes water and it produces sugars. Now, these are both very simple molecules. Here they are here. CO2, that's carbon dioxide. H2O, that is water. But plants are able to build these simple building blocks into a very complex biological molecule. This here is the first product, and this is glucose. And all that you don't need to remember the formula. You need to be able to recognize it, but I'm not going to ask you to fill in bits. But have a look here and you'll see C, that is carbon. Carbon is the basis, the backbone of all biological molecules. Here in form of carbon dioxide, it's not a biological molecule. It's just a very simple inorganic molecule, CO2, plus water, that is hydrogen. And plants are able to take these molecules, highlighted here, and are able then to build them into a complex molecule. Here it is here. Here's the C, here's the hydrogen, here's the oxygen, put together in such a form that they now form a sugar, a complex biological molecule. And this itself can now be taken both by plants and by animals. Whoever feeds on this can use this as the basis for their own biological molecules. There's something that you need to notice though. And that is that when I want to do this, I want to take simple molecules, carbon dioxide, water, I want to shuffle them around, and I want to end up with this here. It's going to take energy. I'm going to need energy. And this is the miracle of plants. And that is that they are able to use the sun's energy, light, in order to do this. And in doing so, what they're doing is they're converting sunlight into chemical energy. And the chemical energy is lodged in the bonds between these atoms. And there are many of them. And those not only keep the molecule together, they also can serve as a source of energy for other living things. So anything that uses this can use it for two purposes, and they do use it for two purposes. The first is we use this as the basis for all other biological molecules. We take these atoms, and again, we shuffle them and put them together. Maybe we have to put a couple of extra things in, so like phosphorus or sulfur, whatever. May need to go into this to make things like proteins and all the other giant molecules that living things actually produce and need. We can do all of those things, but we're going to continually need a source of energy. And while the plants are able to fix sunlight and use that energy, convert it to chemical energy, everything else has to depend on the energy already locked into this molecule. So we will use a molecule like this for two things. First, as a source of atoms to build biomass. Second, as a source of energy to perform all of the metabolic functions that are required to keep a cell alive. There is a very, very bad aspect to this stuff. And that is that what we're doing when first of all, we take this and we manipulate it to use it for all our purposes, for energy, to build molecules, etc. All our biological processes are inefficient. And as I told you, that inefficiency means that we are continually losing energy. We lose energy in the form of heat, and we're going to have to account for that somewhere along the line. And the way we account for it is we have a continual source of energy. The primary producers are able to provide energy to all other living things continuously because they are able to convert sunlight into chemical energy. So the take home from this, first of all, we all need a source. We all need food of one sort or another. Looking at a simple molecule like glucose, at a biological molecule like glucose, what we see is that it's these atoms bound together by chemical bonds. The energy of those chemical bonds originated from sunlight and was converted by plants. Now, this molecule here is available to be used as a source of atoms or as a source of energy. So we're going to have to spend a little time talking about what this looks like in a real ecological setting. Now, what we've thought so far about ecosystems and everything, and communities, whatever, interacting, but we also need to think globally. We need to think about the implications for the whole planet. And the global ecology considers the planet almost as a living entity. If we were to look at the planet and try to budget for the whole planet, that is what global ecology would try to describe. The area that is available for living things to occupy is very small compared to the huge diameter of the Earth. It's a very narrow envelope around the planet. It's about 10 miles in depth from the very deepest oceans and also deep rocks as well, believe it or not, to the upper reaches of the atmosphere. That is about 10 miles. And it's only within that narrow 10 miles that life itself can occur. And we need to think that the different parts of the planet actually communicate with one another. And they communicate with one another, especially in the passage of energy and also in the passage of molecules as well, as we'll see. So let's have a look now at communities of animals and plants and everything else, and see how they interact with one another in terms of matter and of the energy and of energy. We're going to look here is a simple example, and this is from African savanna, the savanna ecosystems, and we're just going to consider a simple chain of events, a chain of eating. So this is a food chain. And it begins, of course, with the plants fixing energy, fixing sunlight into chemical bonds using carbon dioxide and water, as we've already seen. They initially produce a sugar, but they then use that sugar to build their own biomass. So the production of that biomass is called primary production. This is the first production in this chain. Those plants can then be fed on by herbivores. And this is a hartebeest. And what is happening is the hartebeest is eating grass and is converting plant matter into animal matter, into all of the molecules that go to make up a living animal: muscle, skin, tissue, hair, etc., etc., etc. All of those molecules are being derived from plant molecules. They are being, the hartebeest is eating those, right? And it is performing all of them. But when it does so, just remember something. When it's busy converting plant into hartebeest biomass, it is doing so inefficiently. And for many reasons, this passage from plant to animal is inefficient. And especially in terms of energy, going to lose a lot of energy in doing all of those. The next thing is, of course, that these herbivores can be fed on by predators, by carnivores. So the herbivore we call primary consumer, because it's the first stage of eating. The carnivore is the second stage of eating, so we say it is a secondary consumer. And this simple food chain here, each level of feeding is called a trophic level. So this would be trophic level 1, 2, and 3. Now, what we also need to remember is it's an unfortunate fact of biology that life is not eternal. Biological life comes to an end in death. Not only that, the processes of life are wasteful. So, for example, the hartebeest is only able to absorb a small amount of the plant material. Plant material is very difficult to digest. So it's going to lose a lot of the plant material as waste, as feces. The lion also is going to produce feces. All of them, the plants, the primary consumers, the secondary consumers, all of them are going to die. And it's very lucky that they do, because the biomass that they have produced, they've accumulated, represents a store of molecules, and those molecules have to return back to the earth for reasons I'll explain more clearly in a minute. And the recycling of those molecules is the responsibility of decomposers. And this here, by the way, is a dung beetle. But there are many, many, many decomposers which depend on waste products of other living things in order to make their living. And in doing so, they return molecules to circulation. And ultimately, in fact, the end point of this decomposition is the production of carbon dioxide and water. In other words, what they do is they reverse the whole process. And energy in the whole chain is liberated as heat, and the molecules are returned back to circulation. So this we call a food chain. This one is a very simple food chain. It's just these few steps. But we need to realize this is just an example, because even on the African savanna, it would be much more complicated than that. First of all, I'll point out to you, there will be many kinds of plants, grasses, trees, all sorts of things. That's the first thing. The second thing is there are many, many kinds of herbivores in the African savanna. There are many different antelope, there's elephants, giraffe, all sorts of things. So there are many, many animals would be at this level here as primary consumers. Then there are many different types of carnivores, not only mammals, but birds and all sorts of things. And so the real life situation is very much more complex than this. It's not never a simple food chain like this. In fact, all these different levels can interact in different ways. So each trophic level, each level of feeding may consist of many different components which all interact with one another. And that we call a food web. So here is a simple food web. This is for a marine system. And at the basis of the marine systems, first of all, they're effectively the plants of a marine system, which are phytoplankton, largely algae, a single-celled algae, which are photosynthetic and are fed on by the primary consumers, which are planktonic, they are plankton. And then those are fed on by fishes, and the fishes form the basis of food chains for all sorts of things, all sorts of different things. But you can see, you don't need to know the details of this. All I want to point out to you, first of all, this tells you who feeds on who. So fishes feed on krill. Here's the krill, and they are fed on by fishes. Let's take another one. Let's say squid. Here's an example of complication. Squid will feed on many fishes, but there are many fishes which feed on squid as well. Elephant seals will feed on fish, and they'll also feed on squid, etc., etc., etc. Until what it does is it builds this very complex web of interaction in this ecosystem. And we need to realize also that that complication begins to spread even wider into the global biosphere. So we may see interactions over very large distances in the whole biosphere. But remember, all of these marvelous animals and plants and whatever, their destiny is to die. And they ultimately all are decomposed. And ultimately, in the very end, the vast majority of biological molecules are ultimately, over a very long time period, broken down, carbon dioxide and water. But that carbon dioxide and water can again be fixed by the process of photosynthesis using the sun's light, to again produce more molecules which can be used to feed the entire food web. So, and this is just an example for even that marine one. That's a simplification. Here's one for Lake Superior, and you don't need to look at all the details of it. Just have it realized here at the basis of algae and plants, things like that, feeding up to planktonic organisms, and then again to this very, very diverse population of fish. Now, this actually leaves off the top predators, the top carnivores. And in Lake Superior, those would be things like bald eagles, osprey, bear, humans, continually taking out fish, etc., etc. So this is just an example of how complex these food webs can actually become. There is an advantage to complexity, and this is something you should remember for all of biology. Complexity equals stability and control. And for example, in an ecosystem like this, if I was to take out one component, the yellow perch, let's say, take that out completely, they have a different disease or something that kills them all. Well, it certainly makes a difference to the ecosystem. That is true. But taking out one member is not going to drastically necessarily affect the entire structure of the ecosystem. There is redundancy in complexity that can take up a certain amount of damage. Okay, so here's another question for you to consider. Why do we need these decomposers and recyclers? Why are they essential? The answer is that the molecules which we have on our planet are all we have to deal with. Those molecules, the amount of those molecules was established, of atoms, was established at the foundation of the Earth. When the Earth was formed, we received all our atoms within a relatively short time. So within millions of years of the first coalescing of the planet, 4.5 billion years ago, we had already accumulated all the molecules we were ever going to have. We get a very small amount from meteorites that enter the space, rocks and things which enter the atmosphere and contribute a very small amount on an annual basis, but it's minute, absolutely minute, compared to all the molecules that are already here. So basically, that's all we have to deal with. We have to budget those molecules that we have. Now, here's one thing which is really important about plants, is that plants make many, many different kinds of molecules. So here, for example, we've got 3 examples of plant-based things. First of all, here's a banana. It's a fruit. Here is wood, which is familiar to you all, hard and very, very tough and very, very strong. And finally, coal. And coal is fossilized plant material. It's plant material which has been reduced to the stage where it is largely just carbon. That's all that's left. There are other fossils that are produced from plant material which have slightly more complex composition, like oil and that sort of thing. Also largely plant product that became fossilized. These are our fossil fuels. And what I'm asking you is, if you were to try to eat these, which would be the easiest and why? Well, the answer, of course, is the banana. The banana is designed to be eaten. It's designed to be eaten. It's a fruit. That's what the function of fruit is, to be eaten, because the fruit contains seed. And along with eating fruit, you'll eat the seed and you'll transport the seed for the plant. You'll transport it away from the plant itself. So the plant, in making fruit, it constructs molecules which are very easily digested. They are soft molecules. They are not durable molecules. And even if it's not eaten, it would be very, very easily decomposed and its molecules returned to the biosphere. Have a look now and think about wood. Wood is in fact incredibly tough. It's made of a very, very strong molecule, largely made of a very, very strong molecule, which is very difficult to break down. Very, very difficult. Very few living things can break down wood. And in fact, they are all microbes. Anything that feeds on wood, like termites and those sort of things, are actually dependent on microbes in their gut to digest the wood. It can also be broken down by fungi and this sort of thing. These are the decomposers which are most important in breaking down these tough plant molecules. If those decomposers were not there, if all this plant material did not get decomposed by these microbes and all its molecules returned into circulation, what would happen is it would end up as a fossil. And we would end up ultimately with all of our carbon on the planet being locked into a fossil source of carbon, and nobody would be able to use it. And the entire biosphere would grind slowly to a halt if it did not have a source of carbon-based molecules with their atoms and with their associated energy. Everything would grind to a halt because it is those molecules with their associated energy that drive ecosystems. So that is the importance of the decomposers, especially for products like this. Tough, we call them recalcitrant molecules, tough recalcitrant molecules like this. If we didn't have decomposers to break them down and put them in, everything might end up being contained in those tough plant molecules which nobody could use. And eventually we'd run out of carbon to drive everything else. So when you see the mushrooms or you see the termites running around, whatever, you say thank you. Treat them with respect because they are providing molecules and energy back to the ecosystem. So this is just an example of what I'm talking about. This is what I mean by having these molecules must be recycled. This is called the carbon cycle, and it's easily broken down into two parts. And that is, first of all, that it is the components of photosynthesis take inorganic carbon, carbon dioxide. They take that carbon and they put it into molecules which can then be used biologically. There are two important areas where this occurs. The first are terrestrial. The plants and everything else are growing on land, but even more important are the systems in the marine systems, where largely algae, these sorts of things, and planktonic cyanobacteria, all sorts of things, they perform photosynthesis as well. All of those processes then feed everything else. Everything else uses ultimately the sun's energy fixed by the plants together with the molecules created by the plants. And we use, especially, we see that their metabolic processes are funded by respiration, and that returns carbon dioxide to the air. When you breathe out, what do you breathe out? You breathe out carbon dioxide and water. You are, in fact, contributing back carbon that was originally fixed by the plants. The entire biosphere cycles carbon around and around and around, builds it into molecules, breaks it down, sends carbon dioxide back into the atmosphere, refixes it in photosynthesis again, recycles it around and around and around. So like to point out to people, um, you know, if you do the math, which is very complicated, and you work out how many uh, carbon atoms you have in your body, which is like in scientific terms 1 gazillion, and you look at how old those carbon molecules are, and you think about recycle, you can work out how rapidly carbon molecules are recycled. You do all of that math, and you will end up realizing that everybody on the planet has molecules inside them, carbon atoms and even whole molecules, which were once part of William Shakespeare, let's say. So we're joined to all our ancestors by the fact that we are using carbon atoms especially, which were once used by them. I also like to ask people, how old do you think you are? And give me your birthday, whatever. But realize also that in fact you are more than 5 billion years old. More than 5 billion years old, because that is when your atoms were made. And those atoms have been recycled and recycled. They first of all coalesced into our planet, then they have been recycled ever since. And there you are now, your clump of molecules. So, and let's have a look at, again, here's our African savanna again, and just to refresh our memories. First of all, here's our primary producer, the tree. The primary producer is using sunlight to fix carbon, to fix what was gaseous carbon, carbon dioxide, taking that carbon and oxygen, putting it into plant matter. Now, very importantly, as a byproduct of photosynthesis, these plants produce oxygen, which most living things on the planet, not all, but most living things have come to depend on oxygen. So the plant is fixing carbon dioxide into biomass. And first of all, the process, that process itself creates plant matter, but it is essential that that plant matter the atoms ultimately be recycled. Otherwise, everything would end up being built into plants and not being able to leave the plants. So, for example, the tree continually drops leaves, which are decomposed. The atoms make it up, the atoms and molecules that made up the leaves may be cycled through living things again, but ultimately, the process of decomposition will ultimately produce carbon dioxide and water. Water, the plant obtains its water from groundwater, which is taken up together with other minerals that it needs, things like sulfur, phosphorus, nitrogen, etc. You can think of the plant as being like a factory that is manufacturing food, and it's the first food in the food chain. That food is then eaten by the first level of the first trophic level. And remember also that this elephant is going to be pooping plant matter that is unable to digest, and is also going to be urinating, releasing biomass. It's going to lose material continuously, as well as running all its own biological processes. It's going to be breathing out carbon dioxide and water. And we're going to realize, if you were to get close to it, that elephants are actually very warm. They're releasing heat the whole time, and that heat is essentially wasted, and it's going to be radiated out to space. So the take-home message is this: for the whole structure of our biosphere, the flow of energy is one way. We are continually losing energy, and ideally we lose as much energy from the planet as comes in from sunlight. So the sun is continually providing energy to the planet. That energy is fixed by plants, but ultimately is radiated out. And the reason that we continually lose energy to space is because all the processes that we're talking about are inefficient. It is a law of physics that energy cannot be created, cannot be destroyed. It can only be changed from one form to another. But every time that change occurs, it is inefficient. And energy will be lost as heat. So our planet continually loses heat, but that energy is continually replaced by light energy coming in, which is fixed by the plants. Molecules, that's a different story. Our molecules, we have a set amount of molecules on the planet, and those molecules must be recycled continuously to keep living things supplied with the building blocks of biomass. So when we look at it in total, sum total, just remember, the Earth is a closed system for molecules. We continually recycle all our molecules. And by the way, it's not just carbon. The same rules apply actually to many, many, many things that are needed by biological organisms. Sulfur, phosphorus, nitrogen, all of these things are recycled through complex cycles in the biosphere. So we recycle all our molecules continuously, but we are an open system, a one-way system for energy. As much energy strikes the planet is actually radiated back, ultimately is radiated back out to space. So having said that, let's just think now a little bit about one of these complex ecosystems. And let's box everything. We're going to box all our primary producers as one entity. We're going to box all our herbivores as one entity, etc., etc. Let's see what happens from level to level. So we've got our plants. They are fixing the sun's energy, creating biomass. That biomass and energy is being fed on by herbivores. Let's see how efficient these steps are. And we're going to find out they're astonishingly inefficient. So each of these is a trophic level. It's a level of feeding. Here are our primary producers. Here are our primary consumers, things like insects, etc., that feed on plants. In a savanna system, it would be also include antelope, all the rest of it, anything that, all those herbivores that feed directly on plants. Secondary consumers, the first level of predation, let's say. We may have rodents, things like that feed on insects, for example. And then those themselves are fed on by top predators like hawks, eagles, or whatever. So in this system, we have primary producers, primary consumers, secondary consumers, tertiary consumers. And when we look at how efficient each level is, it's astonishingly inefficient. Of 1 million, now this, by the way, a J is a joule, and it's a measure of energy. But this applies to biomass as well. But we'll just think about this in terms of energy. Of 1 million joules of sunlight coming and striking Earth, only about 10,000 would be fixed by plants in the process of photosynthesis. And that energy is fixed into molecules, which can then be used by the other trophic levels. But the next trophic level, the primary consumers, they only incorporate about 1,000 joules into their biomass. That's a 90% loss of energy from there to there. Same for the next level. It's about 90% is lost. But here's the primary consumers. About 90% of energy is lost when these secondary consumers eat these insects. They only incorporate about 100 joules of energy. The rest is lost. Same with tertiary consumers. Now, there's lots of implications of this. Because first of all, you must realize that we're going to need it if we're going to support an entire food chain like this, complex food chain with many members in each level. we're going to have an enormous amount of plants just to keep this amount going. We're going to have an enormous amount, have to have a large amount of this to keep these going. If we go up our trophic pyramid, we see we can support less and less and less biomass at each level. And the reason that that happens is because we have such substantial losses of molecules and energy at each level of these trophic levels. So this is called the trophic pyramid. It is an approximation. I should tell you that there are, it varies a lot from ecosystem to ecosystem. But in general, about 90% is lost at each trophic level. But only about 10% gets incorporated at the succeeding levels. So in order to support a reasonable size population of hawks or eagles or owls or whatever, you must realize we're going to have a lot of plants at the very basis. And if we lose energy and biomass here in the plant trophic level, we're going to have to compensate for that up here. We're going to lose more and more and more. So why is this? Why is there this incredible loss? Well, I've already told you that, first of all, whenever we transform things from one form to another, it is inefficient and we lose energy. But we also lose molecules as we move from level to level. And here are some of the reasons why. So first, here there's a horse, and the horse eating grass, of course, and is taking in that biomass and is attempting to convert that plant material into horse biomass. But the digestive processes themselves are very inefficient. And a lot of this plant biomass is lost as feces. And in addition, there's biomass lost in the urine. So these are pure waste products that go back into the environment and need to be degraded by the decomposers. Second of all, the processes of life itself, all of the metabolic processes, respiration, etc., etc., all of those processes are themselves inefficient, and we continually lose energy as heat. We can only recoup a certain amount of energy. The rest is lost as heat. But that provides, or for all of the life processes, provide that when you see a horse galloping, that horse is galloping because it's supplying energy to its muscles. And that supply is inefficient. Okay, it's going to radiate a lot of heat out. The process of respiration itself, which is the process whereby living thing produces its useful energy, that is inefficient itself. And so a lot of that is going to be radiated out and lost and eventually radiated out to space. So I'd said to you before that these kind of trophic interactions with one another is what determines the structure of ecosystem and also determines their stability. So if we were to look at a very simple food chain, like as we saw earlier, just primary producers, then primary consumers, secondary consumers, etc. In a system like this, the interactions are determining the structure, the number of different organisms. And just think about it this way. This lion depends upon a source of herbivores in order to survive. This lion has to maintain its own integrity, its own biomass, but also it has to reproduce and it's care for the progeny and everything else. All this demands that there be a certain level of food available. So if I was to take out all of the hartebeest, what would happen to the lion? Even more important, if I was to take out the lion, what would happen to the rest of the ecosystem? So let's take out the predators at the top and then watch what happens to these populations down below. A population control, the feeding of this predator on these populations of herbivores, is what controls the size of the herbivore population. So fine, we take out the lion and the herbivores all boom, right? They're going to have a population boom. They're going to be in far more of them. What is that going to do to the ecosystem itself? Because they depend upon the plants. Now I take out the lion, and what I'm going to end up doing is I'm going to end up denuding the plants because there'll be too many herbivores. These trophic structures are very important in establishing how stable the system is. And interfering with them can have dire consequences for the whole ecosystem. So with that in mind, I want you now to go on to the exercises, etc., and have a look. You're going to be taken through a whole lot of different exercises, looking at different trophic structures, looking at different ecosystems, and seeing how they are structured, but also what is the impact of changing the structure. And then to end it off, I've asked you in your discussion to please, first of all, describe some of the things that you will have done, but especially to consider how human beings have in fact interfered with these ecosystems, and think about it in terms of the trophic structure. How have we interfered with different things, removing certain components of the food chains, etc.? What has that impact been? I will also just point out to you, please, I noticed that a lot of you have left discussion till the very end. Don't do that. Try to have all your work, all the exercise and everything done in good time, because the discussion needs time. Some of you have already contributed and have provided wonderful contributions to the discussion, but it's going to take the rest of you who've left everything till Tuesday night. It's going to take you a lot of time to go through those contributions. And that is the whole point of the discussions, is to go through the contributions, think about what people have said, and discuss what they have said. Okay. I'll also point out to you that there is a pinned discussion which is continuously available. And that pinned discussion is so that you can post questions to me or to the rest of the class, or discuss questions that other people have raised. Okay, so good luck with all of that. Let me know if you have any problems. And remember, please, that your first quiz will be this Sunday. And that first quiz is entirely about Module 1. The quizzes are always set for the most recent module that you have completed. Okay, so good luck, and let me know how you go.